Hi, it's Katrina. A new flying species. Roy Smith, a University of Portsmouth PhD student, recently found fossil evidence of a previously unknown prehistoric flying reptile hiding in plain sight. He spotted it in a mislabeled jar, identifying it as a shark fin skeleton. It was found in a fossil collection that had sat, gathering dust, at the Booth Museum in Brighton since being discovered during the 19th century by laborers who sold the artifacts for extra cash. Smith identified the object in question as the beak tip of a mysterious pterosaur species. Writer Stephen Morris noted in a Guardian article about the discovery that pterosaurs existed between 228 million and 66 million years ago and were the earliest known vertebrates to have evolved powered flight. The beak resembles that of the alanka, a huge flying reptile that was once found in modern-day North Africa and had an estimated 13-foot wingspan. It was found among fossils from two other pterosaur specimens, which Smith identified as belonging to the Ornithostoma genus. As far as the species of the newly discovered fossil goes, in Smith's words, it is a paleontological mystery. Bioluminescent fur. As one of only two mammals that lay eggs, the platypus is already famous for being one of the strangest creatures in the animal kingdom. But did you know that it glows? Yes, it has even more bizarre features than you knew. Its fur glows in a neon greenish-blue color underneath an ultraviolet light. This strange characteristic, called bioluminescence, sets the platypus apart from other egg-laying mammals, known as monotremes. But surprisingly, it's not the only known animal that possesses this feature. Bioluminescence has now been observed in placental New World flying squirrels, marsupial New World possums, and the monotreme platypus of Australia and Tasmania, wrote the authors of a recent study published in the journal Mammalia, who also pointed out that bioluminescent mammals are found in 3 continents and a diverse array of ecosystems. Besides being found in these mammals, it is found in other animals, including sea turtles, and the trait has also been detected in certain birds, fungi, flowers, insects, and fruits. The first example of bioluminescence among mammals was discovered in 1983 in North America's only marsupial, the Virginia possum. Then, in 2017, scientists accidentally noticed the feature in North America's flying squirrels, which are considered a placental species. Researchers are unsure how mammals benefit from bioluminescence. While some animals, including birds, are known to use this trait for mating purposes, this is unlikely the case for platypuses, as males and females both have it. One theory suggests that the moss-like glow that bioluminescence creates helps nocturnal mammals blend in with their surroundings, but who knows? The mystery of the platypus continues. Unidentified spy boat. A high-end solar-powered spy boat recently washed ashore on Tiree, a remote Scottish island that is part of the Inner Hebrides archipelago. Beachgoers discovered the mysterious vessel situated between large rocks near a military base and contacted the Coast Guard. Only the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy use that particular kind of boat, called a wave glider spy vessel, yet nobody has come forward to claim it. Because it is not equipped with lights, a requirement for all seafaring vessels, it's believed that someone may have used the boat for illicit purposes. One theory is that the boat is a Russian replica of the wave glider, and that it was perhaps in the area to spy on the British military. Although it is true that the Russian military developed such a vessel in 2016, called the Fugu, these claims remain unsubstantiated. It makes sense that a covert spy boat would be near Tiree, which is along a route that British nuclear submarines would take while en route to the North Atlantic. For now, however, nobody knows whose watercraft it is and why or how it ended up where it did. Hegra. Also known as Mada-in Salih, this ancient site was once part of the Nabatean civilization and is considered a sister city to Petra in Jordan. Located in Saudi Arabia, it is full of over 100 monumental tombs dating from the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD. Also known as the archaeological site of Al-Hijr, the tombs and monuments were cut directly into the sandstone, and it was the second largest city built by the Nabateans after Petra. The Nabateans were highly advanced people with impressive archaeological and agricultural techniques that many people have never heard of before. They were famous for their wells and rainwater tanks carved into the rock that are still functional to this day. Before they were annexed by the Roman Empire, these nomadic people flourished thanks to their monopoly on the spice trade route. Everything had to go through them as they ran the territory between the Arabian and Mediterranean seas. Caravans full of peppercorn, ginger, sugar, cotton, you name it, passed through Hegra. The Nabateans also became suppliers of frankincense and myrrh, which were aromas used in religious ceremonies. The society is largely a mystery to scholars, despite flourishing for centuries. Much of the history of Hegra was lost after the Romans arrived and was only mentioned by travelers and pilgrims on their way to Mecca. They didn't leave behind any written record, so everything we know is only from people who mentioned them in the past. Archaeologists and historians lament that they did not leave behind any mythological texts either, to better understand who they were and what they believed in. According to Islamic texts later on, the Nabateans were punished by Allah for worshipping idols and were struck by earthquakes and lightning. Many people believe the place is cursed, which has helped to preserve it, and the government was not big on promoting ancient archaeological sites. Now, however, all that has changed, and Saudi Arabia is granting permission and easy access to people who want to visit the site. What we know about the city and the people who lived there is just scratching the surface. Over 10 historic languages have been found inscribed around the area, and this powerful region is believed to have been instrumental to the beginning of the Arabic language. Forgotten memorials. Michael Woodward, a Nottingham University Hospital's maintenance worker with an archaeology degree, recently discovered a collection of forgotten World War I memorial plaques at the Queen's Medical Centre in the UK. The plaques apparently remained hidden in plain sight for years as Woodward walked past them daily. He eventually took notice of them and began studying them, and it was only then that he realized their significance. Why the plaques were lost remains a mystery, according to Woodward, who spoke with Nottinghamshire Live following the discovery. A lot date from before the NHS, he explained, adding it's poignant as well, as it's exactly 100 years ago they were dedicated during the Spanish flu pandemic in 1920, and Remembrance Sunday as well. For those who don't know, Remembrance Sunday is a British holiday dedicated to commemorating British military and civilian service members who served in World Wars I and II and subsequent conflicts. Following World War I, beds were endowed in memory of groups and individuals at the General Hospital, which occupied the site prior to the present-day NHS establishment. Plaques that originally hung above their dedicated beds were eventually relocated when the hospital's ownership changed hands. 5 of them, which the Imperial War Museum had listed as missing for quite some time, were found on a wall near the hospital's main entrance, hidden in plain sight. Rare white bat. Shortly before Halloween, staff at the Denver Zoo noticed a rare white bat flying around in its bat cave exhibit. The specimen, which was captured on video at the cave's melon feeding station, is a leucistic Seba's short-tailed bat. The term leucism encompasses a series of conditions resulting in partial pigmentation, leaving an animal with a pale, patchy, or white appearance. It's not the same as albino, which is a complete absence of melanin. Creatures with leucism lack the characteristic red eyes, vision problems, and certain other traits and ailments that come with albinism. There are not many confirmed cases of leucism in bats, but experts believe it may be more common than the records show. Reports of white bats have been made all over the world, and plenty of these nocturnal and elusive creatures undoubtedly go undetected by the human eye. At the same time, leucism in bats is generally speaking rare. Employees at the zoo named the new bat Shikaka after a leucistic bat in the movie Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. I love that movie. Glow-in-the-dark mushrooms. There are nearly 100 known bioluminescent mushroom species in the world. The newest one, called Rhoridimyces phyllostachydus, or something like that, was just discovered in northeastern India as part of a scientific project to document mushroom species. The India Times reported that the fungus was spotted along a stream in August during monsoon season. It's one of many newly identified species out of the several hundred that the team of scientists found. Locals already knew of R. phyllostachydus, which they call electric mushrooms. A resident led the researchers to it in the middle of the night and instructed them to put their torches out. Several of the light-emitting mushrooms, which grow on dead bamboo branches, instantly began to glow. A report on the team's findings notes that only the mushroom stalks are bioluminescent, which tipped them off to the possibility that it might be a new species. They took some samples back to their lab, and sure enough, their suspicions proved correct. Additionally, it's the first species of its genus discovered in India, and one of just a handful of growing fungi ever found in the country. But there are likely more out there, waiting to be identified and scientifically reported. Bizarre wartime climate anomaly. Over 8.5 million soldiers died during World War I, and a new study shows that there was another big factor that contributed to the death toll. In what scientists called a 1 in 100-year climate anomaly, a unique weather system lingered in Europe from 1914 to 1919, substantially increasing the war's casualties. The atypical weather system, which coincidentally was most active right before or during some of the war's most major battles, came with torrential rain and cold temperatures, causing battlefields to become waterlogged. Some of the highest death tolls were incurred on these battlefields, including Verdun, the Somme, and Ypres, where many soldiers died from disease or drowned in mud holes. Others stood in water for days, developing a painful condition called trench foot because you can never get dry, or developed frostbite. The dangerous conditions that the thick mud created also slowed soldiers and their horses down and made it difficult to move equipment. Research on the climate anomaly claims that the uncharacteristically harsh conditions worsened the war by making the environment more inhospitable. The weather system is also blamed for worsening the 1918 influenza pandemic, commonly called the Spanish flu, and possibly even starting it by altering the migration behavior of ducks, which are known to carry the H1N1 influenza virus. The ducks, which normally migrated to Russia every year, stayed put, putting them and their feces in close proximity to human populations, where they likely contaminated the excessive bodies of water created by the uncharacteristic downpours resulting from the climate anomaly. While it's unknown whether the strange weather system caused the pandemic, and while it's difficult to calculate the true extent of its damage on the war, it was, at the very least, very bad timing. Pompeii victims. Only a relatively small portion of the ruins at Pompeii have been thoroughly excavated, meaning archaeologists will undoubtedly continue to make new discoveries as they continue to dig at the site. But some finds are nevertheless surprising, including the recent discovery of human remains likely belonging to a rich man and his slave. The pair, who apparently managed to escape the initial rainfall of ash, died the following morning in a subsequent volcanic blast that most likely vaporized them. Like the many others who died at Pompeii, they were then buried in more ash. Archaeologists found the two individuals beneath 6 feet of ash and pumice on the outskirts of the ancient city, at what was once an elegant seaside villa with picturesque views of the Mediterranean Sea. The men perished in a side room off an underground tunnel called a cryptoporticus, which connected to the villa's ground-level floor. They likely sought shelter in there from the ash blanketing the landscape, not necessarily knowing that the materials would infiltrate every nook and cranny of the dwelling. The team poured liquid chalk into the cavities the decomposed bodies left behind, capturing the ill-fated duo's terrifying last moments alive. One of the men, aged between 18 and 25 years old, bore evidence of spinal compression, possibly resulting from hard labor. This, along with his presence at a wealthy person's home, indicate that he may have been a slave. The other man appeared in much healthier condition, despite being between 30 and 40 years old when he died, with remnants of an expensive wool cloak underneath him. He was likely the homeowner. Excavations are ongoing at Pompeii, despite the park's current closure due to COVID-19, meaning more exciting discoveries may make headlines in the near future. Water on the moon. At the end of October 2020, NASA confirmed the discovery of water on the moon. The space agency's Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, nicknamed SOFIA, detected the H2O on the sunlit lunar surface of Clavius crater in the moon's southern hemisphere. The discovery, which amounts to the equivalent of a 12-ounce bottle of water, suggests that water molecules are present on parts of the moon that people didn't expect, the lit side versus the cold, dark areas. SOFIA identified the water in a 35 cubic foot area of soil. In a newly published study in the journal Nature Astronomy, scientists explained that while the discovery changes their understanding of the distribution of water molecules on the moon, they do not believe that the presence of water is a global phenomenon. In other words, it's probably not found everywhere on the moon. The amount of water the researchers found is not much. To give you an idea, the dry Sahara Desert has 100 times more water than what SOFIA found on the moon. Still, the discovery is major, and now experts have new questions to answer, including how the moon's water is created and how it withstands the harsh lunar environment. Scientists had long suspected that there was water on the moon, but they only detected it in ice form in the 2 decades leading up to the new discovery. Previous missions also failed to determine whether the substance thought to be water molecules was genuine H2O or a similar chemical compound called hydroxyl. Along with the news, NASA stated that it plans to put astronauts back on the moon in 2024 and to establish a consistent presence there by 2030. Bowfin fish. The bowfin fish is a North American freshwater fish that goes by many names. But whether you call it a dogfish, cottonfish, swamp bass, beaverfish, grindle, cypress trout, or something else, it doesn't make the creature any less strange. Its common name refers to the elongated dorsal fin, and its scientific name translates to bald or smooth fish, in reference to the creature's scaleless head. Perhaps the weirdest characteristic of this fish is its feeding method. This carnivorous species is opportunistic, eating pretty much anything it can catch, including insects, smaller fish, frogs, shrimp, crayfish, crabs, salamanders, and more. When a bowfin fish identifies its target, it lunges forward and quickly opens its jaws, creating a suction mechanism and pulling its prey into its mouth like a spaghetti noodle. Here, one is swallowing an eelfish whole by sucking it in slowly. The eelfish doesn't even know what's happening. Is it just me, or does this look really disturbing and gross? The somewhat prehistoric-looking creature has a long cylindrical body typically weighing around 20 pounds and measuring between 17 and 24 inches, although sometimes they are known to grow up to 43 inches long. The species dwells along the bottoms of lakes, rivers, streams, ponds, swamps, wetlands, and pretty much any freshwater habitat with thick vegetation. Bowfin fish are found across a vast range, including much of the eastern US and into parts of Canada. If you see one, keep an eye out. Guianan cock of the rock. With a vibrant orange coat of feathers, the Guianan cock of the rock is undeniably a beautiful bird, but it's also rather bizarre looking, with a half-moon-shaped crest of feathers on top of its head. This species dwells in tropical rainforests throughout South America, and while the males really stand out, the females are more gray in order to camouflage themselves when they are sitting on nests. Males are orange all over, with an orange bill, legs, and even skin. These birds love to eat fruit and berries that they will grab while flying, although some have been spotted eating other things, including insects and small snakes. Males will spend most of the time hanging out in groups of 40 to 50 males called a lek. The Dallas World Aquarium reports that they will compete with each other in dance battles, and that females like males that are more in the center of the lek, since they are the more dominant and apparently the best dancers. The Guianan cock of the rock is so named because it mates on boulders and in rocky caves. Interestingly, around 40% of males are thought to prefer male sexual partners, and many never mate with females at all. These birds are extremely loud with all kinds of screeching, snapping, and popping noises that they make with their beak. Good news for this bird, unlike some of the other species on today's list, its population is stable, earning it a classification of least concern on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List. The zonkey. Some of the most bizarre animals are also very cute. Take, for example, zebra-donkey hybrids called zonkeys, and yes, they actually exist. Earlier this year, the Trellech Wildlife Trust, a nonprofit rescue group dedicated to preserving Africa's wildlife and habitats, released a statement announcing the birth of a zonkey in Kenya. The odd-looking, faintly striped foal was found alongside its mother in Chayulu Hills National Park. Last year, the mama zebra had wandered into a residential community and apparently began hanging out with some livestock. The Trellech Wildlife Trust relocated her to the park before she gave birth. When wildlife workers noticed the peculiar pair, they quickly realized that during her time away from the park, the mother zebra had mated with a donkey. While it should otherwise lead a normal life, zonkeys are mules, meaning that it will be unable to successfully breed once it reaches maturity, the organization's statement reads. Both mom and baby are doing well, according to the most recent update, which added that they would likely eventually join a group of zebras. In the words of the Trellech Wildlife Trust, until that day comes, they seem quite content to spend their days grazing side by side, a sight that makes us all stop and marvel at the wonders of nature. Shoebill stork. Shoebills are carnivorous birds who inhabit East Africa's swamps and marshlands and who boast an alarmingly ancient and demonic-looking appearance. They look very intimidating, but they are quite rare. The species, which is classified into a family of its own, looks like it's ready to attack at any moment and has a massive, clog-shaped bill which measures up to a foot long and 5 inches wide, according to National Geographic. The bird itself grows up to 5 feet tall, with a wingspan measuring as much as 8 feet. Shoebills use their specialized bills to snatch large prey such as fish, eels, snakes, and even Nile monitor lizards and baby crocodiles. They are ambush predators, meaning they hunt by remaining motionless, sometimes for hours, while waiting for an opportune meal to come along. Once it comes, the shoebill falls or lunges toward its prey, a hunting technique known as collapsing. When it snaps its bill shut, it will swing its bill back and forth, letting all the water and mud and debris spill out until just its prey is left inside. At the end, it will quickly decapitate whatever it caught and then swallow the rest whole. The species' strangest trait, according to the National Audubon Society, is its method of cooling itself. To keep from overheating, shoebills defecate on their legs on purpose. Warm blood flowing through the bird's legs evaporates the liquid waste, cooling down in the process. Hammerhead worm. A Midlothian, Virginia resident recently contacted the state's Wildlife Management and Control Agency for help identifying a large snake-like creature. But it wasn't a snake. It had a half-moon-shaped head. As it turns out, the 10 to 12-inch long specimen is a member of an invasive species of large worm originating from Southeast Asia called a hammerhead worm. These hermaphroditic terrestrial flatworms are difficult to kill due to their regeneration capabilities. If a hammerhead flatworm is cut, it can regrow whatever it lost and become a complete specimen again. According to Live Science, hacked-off pieces constituting just 1/300th of a worm have regenerated successfully. In fact, this is essentially how hammerhead worms reproduce, by snipping off a part of their body and cloning themselves. Hammerhead worms hunt by trapping their prey with a sticky, toxic substance and injecting them with digestive enzymes, which more or less liquefy the creature's insides. The worm then sucks up the juices. Typical prey include soil-dwelling species such as earthworms, slugs, roundworms, and insect larvae. It's thought that hammerhead worms hitched a ride to the U.S. courtesy of the horticultural trade. They have been spotted in greenhouses as far north as Maine, according to the Texas Invasive Species Institute, and have turned up in Florida and North Carolina as well. The species also made headlines 2 years ago after French scientists realized that it had been in the country for 20 years. Citizens had reported the creepy crawlers on many occasions, only for their stories to fly under the radar, with the worm sometimes being misidentified, or because a witness's story was overlooked completely. Finally, in 2018, a team of researchers analyzed these accounts and determined that there are 5 species of hammerhead worms in France, 2 of which are unidentified. Sawsharks. There are 8 species of sawsharks, not to be confused with sawfish, that are found most often in the Indian Ocean and the southern Pacific Ocean. These incredibly rare and unique creatures are known for their saw-like snouts, hence the name. These snouts are equipped with razor-sharp teeth that are used for slashing and shredding prey, cutting it up into bite-sized pieces. These sharks are pretty bizarre, especially if you look at them from underneath. Recently, scientists discovered 2 new species of 6-gilled sawshark. Informally known as Kaja's and Anna's 6-gilled sawsharks, they were found off the coast of Madagascar and Zanzibar. Sawsharks, which generally grow no more than 5 feet long, live at varying depths, but scientists know relatively little about them and are striving to learn more in an attempt to protect them. Dr. Simon Wagman said that the 6-gill sawsharks are really quite extraordinary, as most sawsharks have 5 gill slits per side. He and his team said that the find was simply astonishing. Scientists discovered the 2 new species while researching small-scale fisheries in the region, and their findings led them to theorize that these sawsharks are vulnerable to overfishing. Consequently, experts are increasingly advocating for expanded efforts to identify and protect threatened species that the world may not even know about. Ankole-Watusi. Cattle generally aren't very exciting to most people, but the Ankole-Watusi is nearly impossible not to notice. It derives from the Ankole breed of the indigenous Sanga cattle of Central Africa, an ancient bovine family that originated 2,000 years ago. And while the Ankole-Watusi is considered medium-sized, with bulls weighing between 1,000 and 1,600 pounds on average, its horns are unnaturally huge. The Guinness World Record for the largest ever horn circumference on a bull belongs to an Ankole-Watusi bull named C.T. Woody. whose horns measured 40.75 inches in 2004. The longest horns, that are skinnier, go to Pancho Villa, a Texas longhorn. The Ankole-Watusi was originally imported to the United States from Europe during the 1920s and 30s. An American version of the breed was created during the 1960s by crossbreeding an Ankole-Watusi cow with a Canadian bull, and an official breed standard was established in 1989. Last year, Texas couple Vincent Browning and Shelley Lumpkin decided to put Petco's promise that all leashed pets are welcome inside the store to the test. On the way back from an event, they brought Browning's 15-year-old Ankole-Watusi bull named Oliver into their neighborhood pet store. Employees welcomed the 1,600-pound giant with open arms. His horns measure 9.5 feet from tip to tip. Oliver had to tilt his head to fit through the sliding double doors and into the store, where excited employees waited to greet him. Video footage and pictures from the visit went viral on social media, even capturing the attention of Petco chief executive Ron Coughlin, who admitted that he was slightly jealous of everyone who got to meet Oliver, and that he wished he could have been there. Bupathi's purple frog. In August 2017, scientists announced the discovery of a new frog species called the Bupathi's purple frog in India's Western Ghats. This place is a biodiversity hotspot, which the team found as part of the government's mission to identify every frog and toad species throughout the country. And while the thought of a purple-colored frog may seem visually pleasing, these creatures are actually grayish in color, round, and have a pig's nose. Cuteness is in the eye of the beholder. They look pretty different to other frogs, but looks aside, this homely and seemingly inconsequential creature is impressive in its own right. This frog has numerous unique evolutionary traits, including small eyes, a long snout, and short limbs. It has adapted perfectly to spend nearly its entire life underground. It even eats underground, using its fluted tongue to ingest termites and ants, like an anteater. They evolved separately from the frogs that we are more familiar with, so they have very different traits. Elizabeth Prendini, a herpetologist at the American Museum of Natural History, says this frog lineage is very ancient and has a very low diversity, so this finding is very special and unusual. The newly described species is the second purple frog and member of the Nasica batrachus genus ever discovered. It's related to the Indian purple frog, which was discovered in the region in 2003. There is a lot we don't know about frogs, and over 100 new species are described in scientific journals every year, with many more waiting to be confirmed. The Portuguese man-o-war. The Portuguese man-o-war is not a singular, bizarre creature. It's an entire community of them. It's sometimes mistaken for a jellyfish, but is actually a jellyfish relative called a siphonophore, which is a complex colony of individual organisms that work together to survive. Man-o-wars dwell in warm waters throughout the world's oceans and are often found in groups numbering 1,000 or more. They do not actively swim, but instead float and drift along currents and wherever the wind takes them. Their voluntary movement is more or less limited to deflating their airbags and rising to the surface to avoid predators. Also known as blue bottles, these carnivorous formations are made up of 4 polyps, which merge early in life because they cannot survive on their own. The uppermost polyp is a gas-filled bladder called a pneumatophore. Its bluish-purple hue is what gives man-o-wars their nickname. The man-o-war also has tentacles, which are known to measure up to 165 feet long, but are usually around 30 feet long. They are covered in venom-filled nematocysts, which paralyze and kill their prey. These creatures have an extremely painful sting and can even sting you when they are lying on the beach, so be careful to avoid them and don't pick it up. Thankfully, their stings are almost never fatal to humans, but you can get welts, muscle cramps, vomiting, and an increased heart rate. The sturtlefish. In an experiment gone wrong, scientists in Hungary unintentionally crossbred 2 ancient, endangered, and wildly different-looking fish species from entirely different families, resulting in a beyond bizarre, unnatural hybrid dubbed the sturtlefish. The accidental creation, detailed in a study in the journal Genes, happened when the researchers placed the sperm of an American paddlefish next to the eggs of a Russian sturgeon, hoping to stimulate the eggs to reproduce asexually without introducing new DNA in a process called gynogenesis. To their surprise, however, the DNA from the sperm transferred to the eggs, and the sturtlefish happened. Some of the creatures, which contained more maternal DNA, looked more like sturgeons than paddlefish, while the others, which possess equal portions of DNA from both parents, look like an equal mix of the two species. Mishaps like this bring up obvious questions regarding the ethics of experimenting with animal DNA. We never wanted to play around with hybridization, scientist Attila Mozart, who participated in the research, told the New York Times. The offspring are sterile, which is common among hybrid animals, and they will therefore not reproduce. This is likely for the best, since the American paddlefish and Russian sturgeon were never meant to cross paths in the first place. Scientists are caring for the accidentally crafted creatures, but have no plans to ever make more of them. La Motilla del Azuer. In the central Iberian Peninsula in the plains of La Mancha, Spain, there is a series of Bronze Age motillas, or artificial mounds, dating back between 2200 BC and 1500 BC. Most are between 13 and 33 feet tall, and the mounds are separated from one another by a distance of roughly 2.5 to 3 miles. They were first mentioned in European literature during the 19th century, and people long believed that the motillas were burial mounds. But this all changed during the 1970s, when excavations began on one of the mounds called La Motilla del Azuer. To scholars' surprise, the site turned out to be much more than that. It was a fortified settlement and an acropolis, complete with a stone tower in the middle of a courtyard surrounded by 2 walled enclosures. This town, hidden in a hill, has been around for over 1,000 years, and archaeologists have found evidence of the settlement's walls getting rebuilt over this time span. Besides the necropolis with human remains, archaeologists also found a lot of horse remains, meaning that the locals probably held them in high regard and that they were a huge part of their society. The people lived in dwellings with spaces between them and lots of pits for ovens and storage space. La Motilla del Azuer also contains the Iberian Peninsula's oldest known well. Experts believe that the site's enclosures were meant to protect and manage the livelihood of the settlement's residents by keeping their water systems safe, occasionally housing livestock, and serving as places to store and process grains and create pottery. The site is getting restored to open it up to the public, so you can visit this motilla for yourself. Little America. On October 3, 1933, the first American post office in Antarctica was established at a base camp on the Ross Ice Shelf named Little America. Established in 1928 by U.S. naval officer Richard E. Byrd, the settlement even had its own newspaper. It's just one of 5 Little Americas that eventually sprang up in the area, but it is arguably the most iconic. Byrd would return several times on expeditions sponsored by the U.S. government and supported by the U.S. Navy. This curious collection of 5 bases became their own little community of explorers and scientists. In 1933, a postal worker named Charles Anderson was dispatched to Little America's post office and tasked with running its day-to-day operations, but his job there was more symbolic than functional in the long run. As it turned out, the post office was established more or less as an excuse to create a commemorative stamp and cancellation mark for philatelists, a fancy term for stamp enthusiasts. Do people collect stamps anymore? I actually used to, but I have no idea where my collection is. Frivolous as it may seem, the program was wildly successful. Who doesn't want a stamp from Antarctica? People eagerly paid an extra 50 cents to the Byrd Antarctic Expedition for the 3-cent stamp, and somewhere between 150,000 and 240,000 letters were marked. The novelty evidently wore off, however, and the Little America post office closed in 1935. The Little America bases were also ultimately abandoned, and what became of them is somewhat of a mystery. Little America 3, which was established 6 miles north of the base that held the post office, was rediscovered once in 1958 after being buried in snow. But it was once again lost and may have sunk into the Southern Ocean. The final establishment, Little America 5, drifted out to sea with an iceberg in 1987. Trellech. Once the largest settlement in medieval Wales, the lost city of Trellech existed only in legend until 2005, when a former toll booth worker named Stuart Wilson used his life savings to purchase a plot of land where he thought its ruins could be found. It took Wilson 12 years of digging around on the 4.6-acre plot to come up with any evidence of the 13th century settlement, but all that time and energy was worth it. He found it! After spending over 6 figures in additional costs beyond the price tag of the land itself and enlisting the help of hundreds of volunteers, the man and his helpers had uncovered the remnants of 8 buildings. Included among them are a moated manor, a round stone tower, and several outbuildings, which once ran alongside the city's market. By the mid-13th century, Trellech became an iron production center for an influential family of Norman lords, known as the De Clares, according to Wilson, who spoke with the BBC in late 2016. He claimed that the city had around 10,000 residents at its peak, making it rather sizable for the time, when London boasted a population of 40,000. And, he said, Trellech expanded rapidly, stating this population grew from nothing to that size within 25 years. Evidence suggests that the settlement was destroyed in 1296 during a Welsh rebellion. It was rebuilt, with most of the buildings found at the site showing signs of having fallen into ruin by the 15th century and being completely abandoned by 1650, shortly after the end of the English Civil War. A lost city found thanks to this man's persistence. Would you spend 12 years looking for a lost city? Let me know in the comments below. Greenland's eastern settlement. Norse explorers, aka Vikings, from Iceland founded Greenland's eastern settlement in 986 AD. Its name is slightly misleading as the site is actually located on Greenland's southwestern tip. Nevertheless, the settlement thrived, reaching between 4,000 and 5,000 residents at its peak. Its economy was based mainly on sheep and cattle farming, and seal hunting largely supplemented the food supply. Fishing also eventually came to play an imperative role in the eastern settlement's economy. The site was abandoned during the early 15th century, with the last known sign of life there being left behind in the form of a written record detailing a wedding in 1408. It survived roughly a century longer than the western settlement slightly to the north, which was deserted around 100 years earlier. Today, there are hundreds of farm ruins, as well as the remnants of 16 churches. The eastern settlement may have declined due to climate change. Evidence indicates that during the 14th century, the demand for winter fodder appears to have increased, while hay production slowed down. Consequently, fishing became more important to economic survival, as isotope analyses of bones found at the site show. Leading up to the 1300s, around 80% of settlers' diets came from agricultural products. But after the turn of the century, somewhere between half and 80% of food came from the sea. Regardless of what caused this shift, it's clear that something serious enough happened to dramatically alter the settlers' way of life. The reasons behind why the eastern settlement was ultimately abandoned are unknown. One possibility is that the island's exports fell in demand, drawing people away from the struggling settlement and back to more centralized Norse communities in places like Iceland, Denmark, and Norway. Stabiae. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, destroying the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum and covering them in a blanket of ash. But those just happened to be the most famous cities that fell to the eruption. There were others, including towns and villages like Boscoreale, Oplontis, and Stabiae, the latter of which arguably has the strangest story behind it. In 89 BC, during what's known as the Social War, Stabiae was destroyed 10 years before the volcanic eruption. All that was left standing was a single farmhouse, according to the writings of Pliny the Elder, and luxury villas offering panoramic views of the landscape were built in place of the ruins. When Mount Vesuvius erupted just a decade later, it completely entombed the glamorous homes in ash. Stabiae was discovered during the mid-18th century, around the same time archaeologists found Pompeii. Those participating in the digs chose to focus on Pompeii and reburied Stabiae for safekeeping, and perhaps with plans to return to it later. But nobody paid any attention to the site again until a local high school principal went looking for it during the 1950s. It quickly became evident that Stabiae was far more important than it was originally given credit for. Dating as far back as the 7th century BC, it served as a bustling commercial and strategic center that reached its peak population in the 10 years leading up to the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Excavations are ongoing and have uncovered several magnificent villas thus far, as well as beautiful frescoes, sculptures, and other breathtaking architectural features, proving that even today, there are overlooked archaeological gems just waiting to be discovered. Syria's dead cities. Over 700 ancient settlements dating back between the 1st and 7th centuries, during the Roman and Byzantine periods, can be found in northwestern Syria along an elevated limestone area known as the Limestone Massif. Nicknamed the Dead Cities by early European explorers, these remarkably preserved towns and villages contain houses, bathhouses, cisterns, pagan temples, Christian churches, and more. Residents produced wheat, olives, olive oil, grapes, and wine. The industrious villages peaked between the 4th and 6th centuries, but were abandoned rather abruptly between the 8th and the 10th centuries. Researchers are conflicted as to why the Dead Cities' residents up and left, and numerous factors could be at play. For one, the shifting of trade routes resulting from Arab conquest took business away. Secondly, it appears as though the climate changed, causing the soil to erode, olive trees to die, and the region in general to become barren. It also didn't help the cities were plagued by repeated invasions and warfare from competing forces. Most of the known dead cities were well preserved, easily accessible, and open to visitors before the onset of the ongoing Syrian civil war. Today, the U.S. government advises not traveling to Syria, period, while many travel sites recommend at least relying on a guide to reach the dead cities, if you try to attempt it anyway. Florida's Lost City. Deep in the Everglades in far western Broward County and roughly 8 miles south of Interstate 75, also known as Alligator Alley, sits the remnants of Florida's Lost City. The 3-acre site's past is up for debate, but it is known that the property was once home to a large Seminole tribe village that was ultimately abandoned. Rumor holds that somewhere between 30 and 40 Confederate soldiers sought refuge there, only to be slaughtered by the Seminoles. During the 1930s, mobster Al Capone supposedly manufactured moonshine at the site. The part about the Lost City once being a Seminole village is in fact true, while the other stories might be true or might not. Over the years, archaeologists and state wildlife officials have found an array of artifacts, including items of Native American origin, such as a canoe, shacks, and an iron kettle that was once used to distill sugarcane into alcohol, according to South Florida Sun Sentinel. Many items are hundreds or thousands of years old, while others indicate that the site saw activity during the early 20th century. Seminole Miccosukee Archives Director Patsy West told the Sun Sentinel in her own words, "What we really think it was, more than anything, was a Prohibition-era bootlegging operation, but everybody who went there came back with a story." West also added that it's possible that the iron kettle was used by the Seminoles, Al Capone, or both. Records show that Capone did indeed own a nearby saloon, adding to the credibility of this seemingly far-flung tale. He was also the only known organized crime connection there. As it turns out, it's also true that Confederate soldiers used the site as a hideout after stealing Union gold, and that they were, in fact, ultimately killed by the Seminoles. It's also possible that there is more history to the Lost City that nobody knows about, and that several Native American groups reused the site over time, according to archaeologist Dave Carr, who dated several artifacts from the site back to somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago. While the Florida State Archives list the Lost City as an archaeological site, there is not much to see there today. It's not marked on any maps, and it's covered in thick, overgrown vegetation. In other words, you have to know precisely what you're looking for to even find it. Akrotiri. Many tourists who visit the scenic Greek island of Santorini are blissfully unaware that it's the site of the second largest volcanic eruption in human history. Known as the Thera eruption or the Minoan eruption, it happened nearly 3,600 years ago during the 2nd millennium BC, burying the Bronze Age Minoan settlement of Akrotiri and other nearby villages in ash, much like the eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried Pompeii. It is this eruption that some researchers believe led to the legend of Atlantis. Unlike Pompeii's residents, however, the people living in Akrotiri, an outpost of Crete, apparently knew of the impending disaster and fled while there was still time to avoid dying under the rainfall of ash that was to come. Researchers know this based on the lack of human remains found at the site, which sits at the southern tip of Santorini. They also learned, based on the settlement's well-preserved remains, that Akrotiri was highly developed for its time, and that it thrived for centuries before succumbing to the eruption. Akrotiri's buildings and artifacts were kept frozen in time by the volcanic matter that buried them, and only one gold item was left behind, suggesting that residents performed a detailed inventory before leaving and took their valuables with them. The port city was an important urban and trade center and was therefore incredibly wealthy. It boasted a sophisticated drainage system, elaborate architecture, and some of the world's first known indoor bathrooms. Because Akrotiri was so highly advanced, some scholars theorize that it represents the city of Atlantis mentioned in Plato's writings. While many, if not most researchers have come to regard Atlantis as a purely mythical place, this explanation is also plausible, especially when considering Plato's words about a great and wonderful empire that was snuffed out of existence. The philosopher wrote, "There occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared into the depths of the sea." Knowing that Akrotiri's residents escaped casts doubt on the possibility that Plato was referring to the settlement in his texts, but the sheer destruction conveyed through his words matches the magnitude of the Thera eruption. At the very least, it's enough to make some experts wonder if maybe, just maybe, Akrotiri is Atlantis, hidden in plain sight. Amy Lynn Bradley. While on a cruise with her family aboard the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line's Rhapsody of the Seas, a 23-year-old Virginia woman named Amy Lynn Bradley vanished into thin air. It was 1998, and the vessel was traveling from Aruba to Curaçao in the Netherlands Antilles when Amy was last seen in the early morning hours of March 24th. She and her brother returned to their cabin around 3:30 a.m. after attending the ship's disco. Her father saw her asleep at around 5:30 a.m., but when he came back about 30 minutes later, she was gone along with her lighter and cigarettes. Cruise passengers spotted the young woman riding the elevator to the top deck. Amy's family realized she was missing shortly after and alerted the ship's staff before docking in Curaçao, asking employees not to let anyone off the ship until Amy was found. Staff apparently ignored the request, and it's unknown whether Amy disembarked and if she did so willingly. It's unlikely that Amy fell or was thrown overboard because the vessel was extremely close to shore when she disappeared, and her remains would have undoubtedly turned up during the extensive Coast Guard search that ensued. But it's also unlikely that she disappeared willingly, as friends and family said that she seemed very happy with her life and was having a great time, with no signs of depression. Since then, there have been numerous unconfirmed sightings of Amy throughout the Caribbean. Most of them are related to brothels, leading her family to wonder if she was, and perhaps still is, being trafficked. Several witnesses described Amy's tattoos and other physical characteristics that were not listed in her missing persons information. Some reports, including one from a former U.S. Navy sailor who visited a brothel, claimed that Amy approached, identified herself, and asked for help before being forcefully led away by strange, aggressive-looking men. He never reported it because he didn't want to face disciplinary action. Other tourists have reported seeing her on the beach, in a store bathroom, always accompanied by men. In 2005, photos surfaced of an alleged sex worker in the Caribbean bearing an uncanny resemblance to Amy. Her family believes it's her in the pictures, and law enforcement has not ruled out the possibility. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to find her. All things considered, it's quite possible that Amy is still alive. The FBI is offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to her recovery. Rico Harris. Los Angeles native Rico Harris enjoyed a short-lived semi-professional basketball career with the Harlem Globetrotters. After just a month, injuries forced him off the court. His luck took another downturn in the early 2000s when he struggled with drug and alcohol addiction and the legal problems that often come with these issues. Thankfully, Rico managed to get clean and stayed clean for 7 years. In 2014, he moved to Seattle to live with his girlfriend, Jennifer Song. Just when it seemed like the young man's life was finally getting on track, his entire existence was derailed. One day in October 2014, not long after admitting to Jennifer that he had relapsed, Rico told her that he was going to explore downtown Seattle and instead drove to LA to visit his family. His mother could tell something wasn't right when her son arrived and assumed that he had been drinking. Rico spent just one day in LA and did not sleep the entire time before hitting the road back to Seattle. He called Jennifer and his mother while driving, and the two became concerned about his mental state, knowing he'd been awake for at least 40 hours. The last time anyone heard from Rico was early the next morning, when he told Jennifer he was getting gas in Sacramento. His abandoned car was found at an isolated rest area in Yolo County Regional State Park. It was out of gas and the battery was dead. Even more strange, Rico's cell phone and backpack were discovered along the side of the road 70 miles away. His car and belongings showed no signs of foul play, but the phone contained a strange video of Rico ripping and throwing things in his car shortly before his disappearance, serving as alarming evidence of his disturbed mental state at the time. People reported credible sightings of Rico, but all all tips led to dead ends. No trace of the man himself was ever found, despite an extensive search, and authorities admittedly remain baffled about Rico's disappearance. Jennifer has cooperated with the investigation and assisted in the efforts to find her missing boyfriend, and is not considered a suspect. April Beth Pitzer. In 2004, 30-year-old April Beth Pitzer moved from Arkansas to Newberry Springs, California. The married mother of two told her family that she worked as a waitress, but they later learned that April was living on the street and in and out of homeless shelters, and that she wasn't taking her medication for bipolar disorder. April worked as a caregiver and was trying to get on her feet when she abruptly announced that she was returning to Arkansas. She was last seen on June 28, 2004, when someone picked her up to take her to the bus station. It's unclear whether April ever even boarded the bus, and the troubled woman was never seen again. A friend reported her missing the following month. However, her mother suspected foul play since she had acted as an informant in a federal case that sent someone to prison prior to her disappearance. Several of April's belongings, along with a bloody mattress, were found in a mine shaft the following year. They were worn by the elements, however, and offered no valuable DNA evidence. Authorities painstakingly searched for April, inspecting mines throughout the region, but never found her. To this day, there are no suspects in the case, and although April's mother believes she was murdered, there is no solid evidence that she is even dead. John Michael Spira. On February 23, 2007, a successful 45-year-old businessman and licensed pilot named John Spira met with his estranged wife Suzanne to discuss the terms of their divorce settlement. He then went to his West Chicago, Illinois office, where he was last seen around 7 o'clock in the evening. John never showed up for dinner with a friend, despite confirming the plans shortly beforehand over the phone. His girlfriend attempted to report him missing, but because she's not a relative, police refused to take the report. The man's car was found outside his office, and his phone remained active in the area until 11 p.m. the night he disappeared. Suzanne, the soon-to-be ex, filed a missing persons report 2 days after John vanished, and their divorce was finalized shortly after. John and his wife lived together throughout their divorce proceedings, but allegedly parted on amicable terms. Around the time he disappeared, employees of the business he owned reported that an industrial roll of plastic went missing from the workplace, but it's unknown whether this has anything to do with John's disappearance. His business mysteriously burned to the ground later that year. Investigators found nothing suspicious, but John's family suspects that the blaze somehow relates to his disappearance, and his sister believes that Suzanne, who passed away in 2010, had a hand in these events. John's credit cards and identity have not been used since he vanished, no signs of foul play have been found, and there are no suspects named in the case, leaving detectives to wonder if he abandoned his life voluntarily and started over as someone else. Interestingly, earlier this year, detectives took a fresh look at the case and issued a public notice urging anyone who invested money with John to contact them. Marilyn Renee Nicole McCown. Marilyn Renee Nicole McCown, who went by Nikki, was last seen at a laundromat in Richmond, Indiana on July 22, 2001. Surveillance footage shows the 28-year-old leaving the establishment in her vehicle, seemingly in a calm state, although she had mentioned to her mother earlier that day that some men harassed her at the business. Nikki, a bride-to-be with a young daughter from a previous relationship, never returned home. Her fiancé tried returning his wedding band, which Nikki had purchased, and sought refunds for expenses related to their upcoming wedding, claiming he needed the money to buy a cell phone and fund the search for Nikki. He reportedly failed a lie detector test, raising the alarm that he may have been involved, but he disputes these claims. More details slowly came to light, including Nikki's recent affair with a man named Tommy Swint, who became a police officer after she vanished. He resigned 2 months into the job when his superiors learned he was a suspect in the case. Swint was actually later indicted in another woman's murder, but committed suicide before authorities could arrest him, taking any details of his possible involvement in Nikki's disappearance to the grave. Nikki's vehicle was found several months after she disappeared in the parking lot of an Ohio apartment complex. She had lived at the building years before with an ex-boyfriend who still resided there, and Nikki had called him the day she went missing. The car showed signs of tampering, yet her folded laundry was still in the back seat. The only proven fact about this case is that there were several suspects, but her case may remain unsolved. Jeremy Carl Burt. On February 11, 2007, U.S. Navy veteran Jeremy Carl Burt left his father's Boise, Idaho home to visit a friend, but never arrived. His ex-wife, Kim George, received a text message from Jeremy shortly thereafter, stating that he was starting a new life. Kim suspected that the message was not really from Jeremy and discovered later that day that one of her cars was missing. 3 months later, the vehicle was found abandoned in the remote desert in southwest Idaho. Before he vanished, Jeremy had an affair with his divorce attorney, Jeannie Braun. During that time, he secretly recorded conversations with her regarding illegal activity that she was involved in. He later testified against Braun in court, and the recordings were used as evidence against the lawyer, who was consequently disbarred and sentenced to a year in prison. It remains unclear whether Braun was involved in Jeremy's disappearance, but she claimed the two were not in contact for several months before he went missing. Evidence points to the contrary, however, and the results of Braun's polygraph were never released. Jeremy and his ex-wife Kim were reportedly on amicable terms when he disappeared, essentially ruling her out as a suspect. She remarried and passed away in 2016. Oddly, Jeremy shared some mutual acquaintances with Aaron Bernard, another Idaho man who vanished in 2004, but there is no evidence suggesting that the two cases are connected. Jeremy had a baby daughter when he disappeared, and his family strongly believes that he would not abandon her. They suspect that foul play is involved and that Jeremy may be dead, and are intent on finding out what happened to their beloved son and brother. Marion Carver. In 2004, a 40-year-old Boston, Massachusetts investment banker named Marion Carver embarked on a week-long cruise from Seattle to Alaska without telling her family. But that wasn't that strange, since she often traveled alone. She seemed excited for the voyage, according to her steward, Domingo Monteiro, who explained that she ordered room service instead of going to the dining room. Marion was last seen on the second day of the cruise, when Monteiro delivered food to her cabin. The next morning, Monteiro discovered that Marion's bed had not been slept in. Her belongings were still there, along with a tip and an envelope with unknown contents. The employee repeatedly reported Marion's disappearance to his supervisor, who told Monteiro to just do his job. After the cruise, the supervisor promptly donated Marion's clothing to charity and put the rest of her belongings into storage. Nobody reported her missing, and the cruise company finally notified the FBI of Marion's disappearance 5 weeks later. Try not to let anything happen to you on a cruise. The contents of the envelope left behind in her cabin were never released. Marion's family was not surprised that she traveled without telling anyone, but they were baffled by how difficult it was for them to obtain information about her disappearance, leading them to suspect a cover-up on the cruise company's behalf. In response to this allegation, the company suggested that perhaps Marion, who had a history of depression, committed suicide by jumping overboard. But Marion had only boarded with one outfit and 2 handbags, which were all found in her cabin, meaning that Marion would have had to walk to the deck in her underwear, according to true crime writer J.H. Moncrief. Marion's family sued the cruise line and received a small settlement, but her disappearance remains shrouded in mystery. Her father, who pioneered the movement for justice for Marion, sadly passed away without ever learning what happened to her. Stephen Kocher. After leaving his St. George, Utah home on December 12, 2009, a devout 30-year-old Mormon named Stephen Kocher told some friends over text message that he was heading to Las Vegas. He was last seen alive the following day on home surveillance footage, captured 140 miles away in Henderson, Nevada. The strange video shows Stephen parking his Chevy Cavalier in a cul-de-sac and calmly walking away from the vehicle with something tucked under his arm. Inside the car, police found Christmas gifts Stephen had purchased for his family, along with some personal belongings. His cell phone and wallet were missing, however, and his cell signal was picked up at various locations for the next several days before it was lost. Stephen was originally from Texas and grew up in Salt Lake City before moving to St. George. He had no known connections to Henderson or the Las Vegas area, leaving his loved ones and the authorities equally perplexed about what he was doing there when he vanished. Drug and alcohol use are against Stephen's Mormon faith, and he does not appear disoriented or upset in the footage that shows him deserting his car. Maybe he wanted to disappear? His family does not believe that he committed suicide. All they or anyone else can do is speculate regarding Stephen's disappearance and hope that they someday finally gain closure. Hatis Korbasioglu. Turkish immigrant Hatis Korbasioglu was last seen on June 13, 2009 in Toronto, Canada, when she left to visit her married boyfriend, Raiza Kosa, Kosa in New York. The 32-year-old was never heard from again, and her family's attempts to reach her through Kosa were unsuccessful, with the man reportedly changing his story whenever Corbasioglu's relatives called and questioned her whereabouts. Kosa eventually stopped communicating with the missing woman's family altogether. Corbasioglu's car was found abandoned at JFK Airport, and her cell phone and bank account showed no recent activity. There are unconfirmed sightings of her in Turkey, but no official record of her ever entering the country exists, leading investigators to believe that she never left New York. The following year, Kosa, a Turkish refugee who lived in the Long Island suburb of Hicksville, became a suspect in the murder of his wife, Winsome Angela Perez. Perez's body was found stuffed in a bag and dumped at a factory where Kosa once worked as a welder. By then, Kosa had taken a one-way flight to Turkey. He committed suicide shortly thereafter by jumping from a 9-story building, leaving behind an ominous note about how he made the biggest mistake of his life by falling in love with a Canadian woman who knew about his wife and was under the false impression that the couple planned to divorce. Did Haddis suffer a similar tragic fate to that of Kosa's wife? All signs point toward it, but evidence remains virtually non-existent. Thanks for watching. Be safe out there and be very careful and aware the next time you're on a cruise especially. Would you like to hear more mysterious cases? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!